I have to go back to my hometown. It might take a while, so can you house sit for me for a bit? I asked Nancy, the wife of my eldest son James, with a bit of hesitation. Ugh, going back home, huh? You don't need to come back at all, you know? Even if you're my husband's mom, I don't want to live with some stranger, some old hag. She blatantly expressed her disdain and disrespect. Really? Whose house does she think this is? Besides, it's too big for Linda to live in alone, right? We'll make good use of it, so no worries. We'll change the locks, so it'll be useless even if you come back. Too bad. Ever since I started living with James and his wife, Nancy's behavior has just been appalling. I've reached my limit. All right, I won't come back here anymore. Really? For real? Yay! Yes, for real. Just do as you please from now on. I, Linda, have another side that not even James knows about. What would Nancy think if she knew? Silently, I packed my belongings and left the house. My name is Linda. I've been living alone since my husband Thomas passed away 3 years ago, at 57. I married Thomas, a colleague of the same age, when I was 24. We didn't have much money, but we had momentum. I guess we were just young. Soon after our marriage, I found out I was pregnant and gave birth to James the following year. After my maternity leave, I devoted myself to work and raising our child. We thought about having a second child, but we just couldn't afford it at the time. Thomas came from a wealthy family, but he stubbornly refused to rely on them. He had a bad relationship with his dad and left home almost like a runaway, maybe out of stubbornness. James, serious like his father, graduated from college and landed a job at a top company. He seemed to do well at work and had a good reputation, but he struggled with relationships, remaining single well into his 30s. We kind of got married young and with a lot of energy, but it seems like we didn't resemble our parents in that area.
James, when will you let me see my grandchild?
That was Thomas's frequent saying. Our marriage might have been too early, but it was rare to find someone in their 30s without any dating history like James. Back in our days, people always talked about who they were spending their weekends with. Thinking back, it was a more carefree time. Thomas always eagerly awaited James' marriage, but passed away suddenly 2 years ago without ever seeing it happen. It was a sudden heart attack. When he was rushed to the hospital, it was already too late. Overwhelmed by grief, I quit my job and started staying at home. Fortunately, Thomas's insurance covered the remaining mortgage, and I had my retirement funds, so I wasn't in immediate financial trouble. The house we were living in was a newly built one that we bought when we were almost 30. It was filled with memories of Thomas. After Thomas's death, I had to agree with James about transferring Thomas's share to me. I couldn't divide the house, and I planned to eventually leave it to James. When I discussed it with James, he suddenly confessed.
I've met someone I want to marry.
I was shocked. What? You had a girlfriend? Why didn't you tell me sooner? Dad was waiting all this time.
I meant to tell you, but I just couldn't find the right moment. Sorry.
It was ironic that Thomas, who had been eagerly awaiting James's marriage, was no longer in this world. The following weekend, James brought his partner to our house.
Mom, let me introduce you. This is Nancy.
Nice to meet you. I'm Nancy. Nancy, who said she was 28, dressed flamboyantly, and seemed quite unsuitable for James, who had lived a serious life until now. Yet I commented, "You seem bright and nice, don't you?" I trusted that if James chose her, regardless of her appearance, her character must be all right. Nancy looked around our home, scrutinizing everything. I felt a bit uncomfortable. What's wrong? Is something the matter? I asked Nancy. Oh, nothing. Just thinking. So, this is where James grew up?
By the way, Mom, there's something else I want to discuss.
James began. What is it? James wanted to skip the wedding ceremony and just register the marriage. And since his one-bedroom apartment was too small, he asked if they could live with me. I don't mind, but are you okay with that, Nancy? Though I said this, having been lonely in this big house since Thomas passed away, I was internally jumping for joy at James's proposal.
Nancy, you're okay with living here, right?
For a moment, Nancy seemed a bit displeased. But that was just for a moment. Soon she smiled and said, Of course, I've always dreamed of living in a house instead of an apartment.
See, Mom, Nancy agrees, so please.
How could I refuse my dear James's request? Besides, I had my own fears about living alone. Living with a young couple would brighten up the house and maybe eventually bring grandchildren. I hoped this would slowly fill the void left by Thomas's loss. It's fine, James. This is your home, and Nancy, please treat it as your own. I agreed to live with them. However, Nancy's occasional rude remarks troubled me. Once we started living together, my bad feeling proved true. Linda, I'm quite busy, so could you please take care of all the meals and cleaning? Nancy said this as we were still unpacking. And the bath preparations too, please? She treated me like a housekeeper. Yet I endured it for the sake of getting along with James and his wife. But the workload of a household is much different for a single person than for a full-grown adult. Linda, my underwear is delicate, so make sure you hand wash it. Why doesn't she wash it herself if she's so particular? Even I couldn't keep my frustration at bay, so I waited for a chance to talk to James when Nancy wasn't around. I had to do it subtly, not wanting to upset James. Hey, James, could you maybe ask Nancy to share some of the housework? When I mentioned it,
Nancy's never done anything at home, but she says she's grateful for how meticulously you do things, Mom. Anyway, I'll mention it to her. Let's keep getting along, okay?
James seemed to be trying to mediate between Nancy and me. From that day on, Nancy's attitude towards me got worse. Why isn't our room cleaned? There's dust everywhere. Can't you clean your own room? There might be things we don't want touched. What are you saying, Linda? You're such a housewife. Always at home, right? It's like you're leeching off James. At least do your part with the housework. I'm the one leeching off James? If anything, it's Nancy who's the parasite. I've been tolerating everything because she's James's wife, but my anger is reaching its limit. One day, I got a call from my sister. I have a sister and a brother, both married, and no one is left at our parents' house. Dad passed away when I was a student, and Mom, who had been living alone, also passed away a few years ago. We didn't want to leave the house empty, so we put it up for sale, and it seems we finally found a buyer. So he wanted to organize his parents' house. If James and his wife hadn't offered to live with me, maybe I would have ended up alone too. Thinking about it, I was at least grateful not to be living alone now. But even so, if Nancy's behavior continues, I won't be able to take it. Thinking it might be good to take some distance, I decided to leave home for a while. James was away on a business trip that night. After Nancy came out of the bath, I approached her hesitantly. May I have a word? I asked. What is it? If it's something bothersome, I don't want to hear it. And she replied lazily. I have to go back to my parents' house for a while. It might take some time, so I'd like you to look after the place. And what about the housework during that time? You're not expecting me to do it, are you? She asked in a clearly annoyed tone. It seems like that's the case. What do you think? I continued, probing for her response. This is your family home, right? You don't have to come back. I mean, it was helpful that you did so much, but I hated living with some old lady who's practically a stranger. This is perfect. Nancy, thinking James wasn't around, was blatantly rude. It seemed a bit old, but this house is too big for just you, right? We'll use it, so don't worry. Oh, right. Maybe we should change the locks. Then you can't get in, even if you come back.
I was dumbfounded. I had tolerated her rudeness because she was James's wife, and I had been looking after both of them. But I've reached my limit. Understood. I won't come back here, so do as you please.
Really? Are you serious? Yay!
I went back to my room and started packing my things. Not just for this trip, but also to make it easier for movers when the time came. And I put an envelope in my trunk. It was something I couldn't leave behind. The next morning, with my luggage in tow, I left the house. On the way to my parents' house, I arranged for movers to take my things. For now, they would go into a rented storage container until I found a new place. Walking down the familiar road, I saw my parents' house in the distance. Though empty, it was fairly clean thanks to my sister who lived nearby and regularly maintained it. My sister, brother, and I reminisced while tidying every corner of the house. It's hard to maintain an empty house, so selling it seemed like the best option. Still, it was sad to think of our childhood home going to someone else. But I couldn't afford to be sentimental. I took the envelope out of my trunk and called the real estate agent's number written on it. The utilities of the house had been shut off, so during the cleanup we stayed at a nearby hotel. On the third day of cleaning, I returned to my hotel room and took a shower. My phone kept ringing, but I didn't answer because I was all wet. However, the calls were persistent, so I checked the history, and all the calls were from Nancy's mobile phone. Looking at the screen, another call from Nancy came in. "Hello, what's wrong? Why are you calling so much?" Even knowing the reason, I deliberately spoke in a certain way.
"Yesterday, the movers quickly took all your stuff away, but you're not seriously planning to leave for good, are you?"
"What do you mean? Did you not say, 'Don't come back'? Have you forgotten already?" I retorted, a bit mischievously.
"You old hag. Linda, you're our housekeeper, so come back right now."
To be told get out and then come back is quite selfish. Sorry, but I'll pass. Nancy, perhaps boiling with anger, even called me a housekeeper. Oh, I forgot to mention, I'm planning to rent out that house, and I've already contacted a real estate agent. So Nancy, you'll need to move out soon.
"What do you mean? We're living here. You can't just do that."
Nancy's voice trembled, perhaps in confusion. "I own that house. As you said, it's too big for one person. I've been thinking of renting it out for a while to supplement my income. Unless you and James want to be the tenants. That would be fine by me."
"You broke old hag. Are you that desperate for money?"
Nancy seemed to misunderstand, but I'm not in need of money. Unfortunately, I own other properties. I have income from them. So I'm financially fine. I just thought this was a good opportunity to sort things out. The envelope I brought from the house contained the deeds to my properties. Thomas had left them to me in case something happened. Originally belonging to Thomas's father, they were inherited by Thomas when his parents passed away. Thomas hadn't informed me about this, and I only found out about these assets from his will, written before he died. I had planned to tell James about this in time, and gradually gift it to him, but Nancy becoming his wife completely dissuaded me.
"Then make it so we can keep living here. You're the landlord, right?"
Nancy cried out in anguish. "That's why I said, if you two pay the rent, there's no problem, right?"
"Enough. I'll tell James everything when he gets back from his business trip."
With that, she hung up. I wonder what she'll tell James. A few days later, James called. "Hello, Mom. You left the house, and now you're telling us to leave too? Isn't this a family home?" "I just said I had things to do and asked you to house sit, but Nancy told me not to come back, so I couldn't take it anymore." "What? What are we supposed to do?" I told Nancy, "I'm planning to rent out the place, so you two just need to pay the rent. If that's not hard, right?" After I said that, James fell silent. Actually, I've changed jobs. Finally, James began to speak plainly. Since when? Just before we got married. I haven't told Nancy. I couldn't believe it. I thought James was doing well in a top company, but he had been dealing with such issues. Generally, changing jobs is a big deal in life. Shouldn't you tell your partner you're thinking of marrying first? Why didn't you tell her? I was scared. He said that when they started dating, Nancy was pleased to know he worked at a top company. James, with little dating experience until his 30s, didn't have the courage to tell the truth to the first person he considered marrying. I'm now working at a startup. I launched with some college friends, and it looks like we're about to take off. Mom, please help me out. James, having no siblings, was asking for my help. I wanted to support him, but first, as an adult and a spouse, he needed to come clean and gain understanding from his partner. Life would be difficult otherwise. James, you're old enough to handle your own mess. Do that, and then, as a parent, I'll help as much as I can. Got it? After saying that, I hung up the phone. Feeling a bit too harsh, I decided to have a talk with them both. A week after going back to my family home, I finally finished clearing it out. Good job. Let's meet up again when we have more time, I said to my sister and brother, deciding to return home for the time being. Ah, Linda, welcome back. I was waiting for you. Nancy greeted me with a cloying tone as I returned home. Looks like you didn't change the locks. Change of heart? I replied with a hint of sarcasm. Where's James? He's here, isn't he? James appeared from the back, looking utterly exhausted. Did you have a proper talk with Nancy? I asked, and Nancy looked as if she didn't know what I was talking about. Seems like you haven't told her. James, what is she talking about? James confessed that he had left his company to start a venture business with a friend. What? That's it? I agreed to marry you because you were a promising employee at a top company. If it weren't for that, I would have never bothered with a gloomy guy like you, James. Nancy unexpectedly let her true feelings slip. So that's how Nancy feels. In that case, we have no choice but to end this. James, too, sighed as he spoke. I thought we were getting along well with Mom. But Nancy, you were just using her as a replacement housekeeper. This old hag? She's only good for housework, right? What's wrong with that? Nancy said crudely. How could you say that to Mom? Can't you just leave? I don't even want to see your face anymore. I don't need this either. You deceived me, remember? I'll sue you. With that, Nancy stormed out of the house. Are you sure this is the right thing? It's fine. Nancy never really liked me from the start. James said so, but his profile betrayed the bitterness of a man who felt betrayed. Afterward, James and Nancy's divorce was finalized. Nancy blamed James for keeping silent about his job change, demanding alimony, claiming she had been deceived. However, it turned out Nancy had quit her job and was secretly meeting a lover during the day, leading to a settlement where both parties shared the pain. I wanted some compensation for the verbal abuse and being treated like a housekeeper, but I didn't want to make a fuss, so I let it go. I heard Nancy ran back to her parents' house crying, but scolded by her parents for her calculative marriage and divorce, she wasn't allowed to return home. Apparently, her parents were reasonable people. I also heard Nancy had a bad relationship with them. In the end, Nancy not welcomed back home, is living modestly, running from part-time job to part-time job. Maybe I just had no eye for people, but I think I'm done with marriage. It's just too much trouble. James said, half jokingly, half seriously. As planned, the original house was rented out, and James and I are living separately. Still, I found a suitable property among the inherited real estate, so we're just using it as our respective residences. Some might call it indulgent. but I decided to sell some of the properties and invest in James's business. I decided to trust James's earnest appeal to commit to his venture. His marriage might have to wait until his business stabilizes. As his mom, I can only hope he finds the right person when the time comes.